The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Ursula Aroot and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Pantheon. We've got a really exciting schedule today for you. We've got Matt Cheney, who's a co-founder here at Pantheon, will be taking you through Drupal best practices and how to build sites on Pantheon. So we'll be spending about the next hour and 15 minutes on how to build websites in Drupal best practices. In the last 15 minutes, we'll be answering any questions that you have. And the questions, if you can pop them in the chat area on the GoToWebinar panel, I'll respond to those as soon as I can. Matt?
Great, thanks Ursula. And hello everyone. Welcome to the Drupal Development Best Practices and Building Sites on Pantheon webinar. As Ursula said, my name is Matt Cheney. This is a picture of me from a number of years ago giving a presentation. I think in terms of my background, I've been doing Drupal for about 7 years. I've built a lot of Drupal sites. I've gone through a lot of different sort of ups and downs with the development workflow. And part of the reason that I founded Pantheon was to help people have a better time and a better experience building Drupal sites. That Pantheon sort of provides guardrails and sort of best practices for how to make, your really supercharge your Drupal environment. And it'll be great to sort of chat with everyone today around how to be, better Drupal developers and how to use the tools on Pantheon to level up your development game. As I said, 7+ years, and I love Drupal. I want everyone to love it too. In terms of a quick agenda for today, we're going to first sort of just start with getting started with Pantheon, get people all set up with the individual environment, and get an actual site installed. I'll sort of walk people through that if you haven't already.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Modify your files on Pantheon. But it's something that
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
we're then going to talk about using the individual Pantheon environments, the dev, test, and live, and show everyone how to push code in between the individual environments, refresh the database, and have a really good experience using, sort of the different kinds of environments, and explain what's useful for each one. And then we're going to talk a lot about sort of exporting Drupal configuration to code using the features module, hook update, and some other techniques to make sure that when you go move code between the environments, all you're doing is, sort of pushing the code up, and you don't have to do a lot of clicking. But with that, let's dive into it. I'm going to jump into, this is the Pantheon site, and sort of to get going, everybody would need to have a Pantheon account. They're free to get, and they just require a email. And I've got a demo one set up. And once you have a Pantheon account, you sort of are landed on your Pantheon dashboard. This is sort of a catch-all for all the different sites that you'll have on Pantheon. Today we just have one, but as a developer, after a while, you'll end up having a lot of different ones. And I think in terms of best practices, one of the things that Pantheon helps you do is sort of keep all of your development environments in one place and all of your live sites in one place. So you're not like fumbling for different passwords or server accesses, that there's a sort of consistent experience across everything. And that's really important. In terms of the interface, I mean, a lot of stuff is really simple. We've got some basic account information on the right, which you've probably seen. And then the section on the lower right for your keys is interface to actually add or remove your SSH keys. SSH keys are a sort of generated secret and private key pair used throughout Pantheon to authenticate you to the system. If you haven't already, I would definitely recommend checking out either adding your existing public key or generating one and adding it. There's when you try to add it, there's an article from our help desk to just sort of explain how SSH keys work and how you add them. But it makes it really helpful because when you start to then do stuff from the command line or the GUI tools in your local machine, you just have to sort of use the SSH key instead of having to retype your password all the time. It's also quite a bit more secure. So let's go ahead and get going with actually creating a site, and I'll sort of show you how to run through a creation process, and then we'll jump into sort of some of the demos. But in terms of adding a site, very easy. You basically go ahead and say, my first great site. You name a site, and then you go off and let Pantheon sort of do what it does best, which is use a lot of the sort of robots and scripts and sort of our magical multi-tenant infrastructure to actually spin up your site. So right now, behind the scenes, Pantheon's going ahead and it's creating the 3 environments that we'll be demoing today: dev, test, and live. It's configuring your access to those environments so that your SSH keys work. It's making sure that the high performance tools on our platform, Varnish, APC, and Redis, are sort of set up or ready to be set up so that you can have a faster, better performance site. It's setting up a Git version control repository, so you'll be able to use version control right out of the gate. It's making sure you have a MySQL database. It's making sure that you have a sort of a virtual host record so that you can have the different Apache or the different Nginx environments. And it's tuning all of these to be as best that they can be for Drupal. That's one of the sort of advantages of Pantheon, is that we've spent a lot of time and energy to make sure that a lot of that server configuration you already sort of get as a best practice, and you don't have to spend time sort of making sure that piece is right, because it can get definitely pretty complicated. The site takes about a minute to get sort of everything set up, but if you sort of run through this on your own, it can take quite a bit longer. For folks who are sort of starting out with Pantheon, you typically get two free development sites that you can spin up. And those you can keep forever. They're free forever, and you can use them to sort of play around. If you have needs to set up even more sites, there's once you run out of sites, there's a quick form just to ask for more, and we're pretty good about making sure that folks have as many development sites as they need. One of the sort of values at Pantheon is to try to make things as easy as possible for developers, and that's sort of a frictionless, credit cardless kind of interaction. But yeah, the basic sort of deal is that each of these different environments are sort of set up as sort of specific containers with our infrastructure. And if folks are interested in some of the sort of technical details around how we deal with the file system using our next-gen Valhalla file system, or how we're setting up sort of the databases or doing some sharding, on our blog, getpantheon.com/blog, we have a lot of sort of more in-depth technical articles about that kind of stuff, so you can sort of see some of the behind-the-scenes technology that we're using. I also would definitely invite folks. We're at a lot of Drupal events, both in the Bay Area and sort of across the country, and in some cases the world. And we're definitely very happy and open to talk about our technology. We used a lot of Drupal best practices from the larger community in making Pantheon, and we definitely want to share them. As you'll see now, we've got our site set up, and it's sort of launched. And now we have an option to sort of select what kind of site we're going to set up to begin with. So for most folks, especially if you're doing a new site, you're going to obviously want to start with Drupal core. We support Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 on the platform right now. We'll support Drupal 8, as soon as that becomes reasonable for a lot of folks. And by using Drupal 6 or 7, you're more or less using sort of a vanilla Drupal core install like you get off Drupal.org. We have some slight variations to it that we've added sort of to make sure that the installation works best on Pantheon. So we've got some stuff related to how images are handled, and we've modified Bootstrap.inc to make sure that we can inject the settings, passwords for the database, so that you don't have to like modify a settings.txt or a settings.php file. But if you click install Drupal 6 or Drupal 7, it'll install that. We call it the drops repository, and you'll sort of get up and running with a very sort of plain Drupal site. We also support a number of distributions of Drupal. These are things that have sort of start states that do a lot more than just provide a sort of blue screen with a sort of add content button. And I definitely encourage you to sort of check out those distributions and see their stuff for government and news and stuff like that. If you have an existing project, we have an import function that allows you to sort of upload your code, your database and your files directly you can use sort of, URL paths. So if you have it on sort of S3 or on a publicly accessible URL, you can paste it in. We'll go ahead and download that. Or if you just want to upload it directly, you can just use the Drupal or the web upload and send the files, the code, and the database to Pantheon. We'll then sort of extract the various archives that you've sent. If you upload code, we'll go ahead and make sure that that's merged into our drops repository so you're running on the latest version, and we'll sort of make sure everything's sort of set up as a site. And you hit import, the various sort of robots and scripts will run to make sure that happens. But I'm going just to show you sort of the straight Drupal 7 install right now before jumping into some more complicated stuff. But if you click Drupal 7, it'll basically just take that Drupal 7 code, it'll connect to the Git repository, and it will go ahead and install that, and you will have an up and running Drupal site. And I think it's really magical. I mean, in about 90 seconds, you can go from having no site on the internet to having a high performant, the sort of best practice enabled kind of site, and that's obviously what we're going for in terms of Pantheon. But we can go ahead and switch over while that's sort of setting up to the site I had set up before for our demo. And this is a little more fleshed out because I've already done an import of the site, and I can sort of show you through the various features and workflow stuff on Pantheon. So I think the most important thing on a Pantheon site to understand is that when you're actually getting a Pantheon site, you're actually getting 3 different sites. You're getting the dev site, which you can see is a dev-workflow-demo-site.gotpantheon.com. That was when I set it up, I set up workflow demo site as my name for this particular one, and then .gotpantheon.com is the domain that we give everyone who has a Pantheon account. When our website is getpantheon.com, so we figured we'd be clever and call it .pantheon.com for everyone who actually .pantheon, although it is a little confusing. But you've got the dev site that has the link right there, the dev site. You also are given a test site, test workflow demo site, and a live environment site. And those are sort of the three main sites that we're going to sort of demo today to explain how to sort of use the workflow tools. The first thing I can sort of show you with those environments is that when we set you up for the first time, you're only given the dev environment with your code. The test environment, the live environment are not yet initialized. For many people, this is fine. You're going to do most of your development in dev anyway. But if you want to sort of see and use the larger tools, you're going to need to actually go sort of initialize them. To initialize them, it's really easy. You just go to the testing environment, and there's a sort of big clone button. And when you sort of hit that button, what it's doing is it's actually going ahead and copying the latest, it's tagging the version control repository, moving that code over to the test environment. And in the case of a first-time install, it's actually also copying the database and files to the test environment. When we do this later, that won't be the case, but it's basically making a complete copy of what was in dev in test. You can see sort of from the dashboard, there is a sort of green spinning item up here in the upper right. That's for the sort of active jobs on Pantheon. I can show you when we'll do the same thing for live environment. And you can see each of the different operations that are happening. We'll sort of show you, a sort of rough approximation of progress. Right now we have a sort of, smaller kind of site. I'm demoing for you our public getpantheon.com site. So it's not super big, but if you have quite larger files or larger databases, these operations can take a while. One thing we sort of set up that you can enable is the ability to actually have desktop notifications. You'll see I've got sort of Chrome giving these notifications when stuff's done. That can be really helpful if you've got a really long running job and you're sort of or running a backup or something, and you can sort of see when it's done. So those will be popping up throughout the demo. Okay, but now you can see we've got dev, test, and live all set up. If I go in and sort of show you the URLs here, we can sort of take a look. So here's from this I can go ahead and click on dev, and it'll spin up. And here's our dev site, with a slightly out of date but still functional version of our public site. For the test environment, you can see same thing. Looks the same because it's a copy, but you notice the URLs are different, and that, of course, matters a great deal. And then for the live environment, we've got the same thing. And so as I said, those are the three environments we're gonna use today. And if you want to follow along, feel free. Pretty easy to get going, but we'll sort of run through this. All right. So this is the dev environment. And I guess a few things I can talk about with sort of respect to best practices in terms of this environment is, number one, when you're doing a lot of dev and test work, you're wanting to have this be a sort of more private place for your development. I mean, this is your dev environment. This isn't a public site. So one of the things that's really good to do is to make sure that on your dev and test sites that none of the files or content is actually indexed by any search engines. One thing that Pantheon does to help you is it actually, by default on dev and test, will add a sort of special entry to your robots.txt file that basically tells the search engines to not index that content. So if you were to go to the site and check out the robots.txt file, you'll see that on the dev site and the test site and the live before you add a domain, it says that all user agents are disallowed. This is really helpful so that your content that's on the dev doesn't end up in search engines, and that's just something that Pantheon just sort of does by default. The other thing that ends up being really helpful is from a sort of security perspective. Pantheon allows you the ability to add a sort of quick username and password to your development environment or any of your environments so that they're only accessible by folks who actually have the sort of shared password. We can go ahead and just throw a basic password on here just so folks can see a demo. This can be a really good best practice, especially if you're working on a site that needs to be a lot more private. The URLs obviously in Pantheon have a reliable format, and so having a quick username and password on the environments will really help to sort of keep a sort of privacy there. It's also the kind of thing that you set the username and password, but anyone who has access to your dev environment on Pantheon will be able to see just by going onto their dashboard. So if we go back to the dev site, you'll see it's prompting us for a username and password. And once we go log in, it knows we're who we are, and which is really great. All right, we'll save that. Okay, so now we sort of got the dev environment sort of set up. One of the other things that is sort of a neat feature of Pantheon is the team management. So I'm the only one currently on the site that has access to do anything. If you go under team, you'll see, I'm the only one. But Pantheon makes it easy to add additional teams. So I can go ahead and add my colleague Josh, and you just add him by email address, and it'll go out and actually, if Josh has a Pantheon account, it'll just go ahead and immediately add him. If he doesn't have an account, it'll send him an email address to sign up for Pantheon, and then he'll be immediately added to the team. And this is really helpful because if you're working with other people or adding people to and from your project, you can just sort of add their email address, click go, and they're immediately their SSH keys will work to check out any of the code. They have it show up in their site dashboard, and they're very much sort of ready to roll with the development. And this becomes really, really powerful when you have a lot of different people who are all working on Pantheon, because they can just easily add each other and remove each other when people are sort of done with the project, just to keep things reasonable. All right, so let's get into the code here. One of the things that you'll probably noticed on the screen is that each of the Pantheon environments sort of comes with this connection mode item with get defaulted. This allows you to sort of use version control to actually check out your Drupal site and manage all of the changes. So there's this long string that you've got here that you can sort of click in and copy. That string is a connection string to actually check out your specific site to to your local environment. So I can go ahead and just in my shell, I can go to the desktop and just run a quick git clone and then copy the string that Pantheon gives me. And once I confirm that, it's actually going to go to the Pantheon servers, and it's going to actually check out the code. You can see that it's actually downloading. Git is a version control system. It's the one used by Drupal.org as well as a lot of open source projects. It's extremely powerful and allows you a lot of different really advanced features. I think for basic development, the sort of important pattern that you use with version control is you check out a copy of your code, you make changes to that code when you're comfortable that those changes are good enough to sort of push up, you commit them and then push them. And I'll run through a few examples of how to do that. But if you're not familiar with Git, there's a number of tutorials and sort of information online, including several on Drupal.org, just to help you, sort of get up and running. If you're using Mac OS, Git doesn't come by default with the operating system. You need to download the Xcode toolset, which is free, but that'll actually give you Git on the command line. If you're not as comfortable with Git on the command line, there's a number of Git clients you can download for a variety of operating systems that'll sort of allow you to check out your code and sort of use things a little more graphically. But the basic idea is you do a clone operation to pull down your site, and then it will go to our code server and do the checkout. We also have an SFTP mode I'll talk about in a bit too. So if Git and the version control piece here is a little too daunting, there's another way as well. But Git is definitely, I think, a sort of best practice for a lot of this kind of stuff. And then one of the sort of pro things a lot of folks who use Pantheon will do is they'll do a sort of Git clone to bring their code down to their local environment on their laptop or their computer, and then they'll set up a sort of mini development environment on their computer. So they'll have a database and they'll have a web server. And then you can actually do a lot of your development on your laptop. So if you're on an airplane or you don't have internet, you can do development there. It's also super fast because it doesn't have to go over the network. But you can see now we've got the code downloaded. If I go into the code and do a quick list, you can see, pretty familiar pieces of files. We've got Drupal, and then in the site's all directories, we've got our modules and we've got our theme. And since this site's based on a Drupal profile or distribution, we've got our Panoply stuff here. And that's sort of our file system. And just for a quick example, I can show you if we wanted to add a new file to the file system, we can just quickly go and create it. Hello.txt. Hello, this is a test. And we have a file on our file system. It's not yet in Git. If I do git status, you'll see it says untracked file, hello.txt, which means that Git doesn't yet know about it, but it does know it's there, just not part of Git. If you want to add it, you run the git add command, and add will actually tell Git to get it ready to be committed. So you'll see it now went from being red, where it's untracked, to green, where it's where it is being tracked. And then once I've got my file, I can do a git diff, which will show the changes that are for files that have been modified but that haven't yet been added. If I want to go ahead and commit it, I can run a command like git commit. -A is I just usually use. It'll just add all files that haven't been added. In this case, that's not necessary, but -m will give us a message. So this is a test of the Git version control. Once I've committed it, it's committed on my local machine, so it has a record as well as an ID. But it's not until I actually run git push, which it actually will send it to Pantheon. It's sort of a two-step process. So git commit will sort of get it ready. Git push will actually push it to the server. And you'll see then on Pantheon, it knows that the commit's happened, and it's immediately gone ahead and deployed that commit to the dev environment. So on our dev site, if we go to dev, I think I just put that in the root, hello.txt, it actually has that file now on our dev server. And that's pretty cool. Obviously not that useful, but this is sort of the pattern that you use. If you want to put stuff into the system, you can go ahead and do a sort of commit in Git. You can push it up, and you then sort of are off and running. We can do something a little more complicated, though. One of the things that a lot of folks will do is sort of basic sort of theme changes. We'll go into our theme here, Hestia. and we'll go into our CSS directory and we'll just edit our style.css. And one of the things you'll notice if you've been to our public website is we have these strong call to action buttons that we sort of use to ask people to sort of create their account or check stuff out. And we've got a nice red color. We recently changed that, but that's something that obviously we want to play around with. Make sure that we have the sort of best color there. And so in the CSS, one of the things that we have is we have the button style with the different pieces of CSS here. And so one change that definitely we might want to make is we can change the background color of that button to something else. So we can go ahead and add this, which I think is a green. Updating button style on site. And I'll go ahead and just do a quick change here. And this is actually going to go and change an existing file on the system, the style.css, and that'll actually go ahead and push that up. So you'll see, same operation as before. It's now pushed the button style up. And now we have actually a change. One thing that's also pretty good best practice when you're sort of doing Drupal development, and folks who have done it for a while have probably done this a lot, is to actually clear your caches. In Drupal, this helps for if you have CSS or JavaScript that's been aggregated and made changes, this will refresh that, as well as just sort of clean out some other caches that may have stale information. A lot of modules in Drupal will help you sort of do this easily. The performance settings page in Drupal will let you do this directly, but Pantheon has a really nice way when you hit clear caches that actually it will go out with its sort of magic and it'll run a clear cache on your Drupal site, as well as on any of the caches that you might have set up in Pantheon. So for example, it will clear the varnish cache or the Redis cache, and it's sort of a clear all the caches in your entire environment operation. That's really helpful if you want to make sure to everything's sort of ready to go. And it will again sort of run as an active job, tell you when it's done. Then if we're going back to our dev site and checking it out, it'll take a sec because it's got to sort of rebuild all the caches for our site. But you'll see, wow, bam, surprise, our red buttons have now turned green, and that's made a change. So not that that's the best change, but do I guess what we'll change it in just a sec. But that's how you use Git, and there's a lot of other things you can do there. We'll do some more examples, I think, as we move through. But in general, that's sort of the default way to use Pantheon to do file changes. The other mode, which also might be helpful for folks, is SFTP mode. This is also called on-server development mode. So this, instead of actually doing the code changes with a checkout of the code on your local computer, you're actually going to connect to the Pantheon server to actually do the code changes. This is something that obviously won't work if you're not on the internet, but since the internet is all over, this is sort of useful. If you click SFTP mode, it'll actually go ahead and switch it on the back end so that you actually have the ability to use those tools. To use SFTP mode, you will need an SFTP client. You can use those there's some command line tools to do this. One of my favorites for the Macintosh is a tool called Transmit that's been around for a while, and it has a pretty good interface. But I'll demo that, but any tool will do. The important thing you need is under this SFTP help. It has this connection information. And what you need to do is take the different pieces of the connection information, like the server name, your username, the port, which is not the default one, but 2222, and the path, as well as either specifying your SSH key or your password. And then this will actually go out. You can see at the bottom it's connecting to the Pantheon app server and getting your code there. So you'll see here, this has a listing of all the code that we had in our Git checkout, but it's in a GUI, which is pretty cool. See, here's the code on my file system, and then the code on the GUI. And this is nice because you can then say we'll edit that example file, and I actually have the ability to edit this. This is another test, and I can do it on my local machine once I go ahead and save, which I just saved it, it'll actually will do an upload with your SFTP client to push it to the server, and it'll actually make that change directly, which is great. So if I go ahead and just do a quick clear cache and check out that file, we'll actually see that the change sort of got pushed up in real time. This becomes really helpful because, there you go. Because sometimes you actually want to make a lot of, sort of tweaks as you're going along to see sort of the kind of changes you're doing without having to set up a local development environment or anything like that. So one of the things that you sort of do is as you're making changes, Pantheon's also smart. It knows that we've made a change. You see here, one file change is available. It tells me what I changed. I changed my hello.txt, and it'll give me just some little information. And I can see a full diff just to see what actually got changed. In this case, not a whole lot, but you can sort of see. But something that might be more helpful in terms of applicability is we can do the same sort of button style. So we can go to Sites, All, Themes, go into our theme itself, and then we can go into our style CSS. I'm just editing this directly in Transmit, which just has a really basic editor. But if you're using, like a text wrangler or a full-on IDE or something like that, you can actually usually use your SFTP client to use that as well. So you can edit in whatever you're comfortable with. But you can see here, this is our file for the individual CSS, same kind of button style information here. You see we had changed the color previously. So what we can do is we can go in and maybe try a slightly different color. And that'll go ahead and push up our style.css, go back to the dev site, and it'll sort of has pushed the code up there, and do a quick clear cache. And you can see here it even knows that we've made that change, and it'll show, hey, you have this background color, and you move to that one, which is nice. If other people are working on the site at the same time, Pantheon obviously supports multiple developers using an environment, and you're both using this SFTP mode, you can sort of see in terms of the changes what other people are pushing up, which can be an excellent sort of way just to be collaborative. So you can see this is slightly darker button style. So a little darker than before, but maybe we want to go even different, and we'll go ahead and try. We'll try that. I think that's a nice blue on the site. So uploaded our blue style. We'll do a quick clear cache, and we can go ahead and sort of show folks that. And you can do the SFTP mode for a lot of things to change your code. You can obviously make small tweaks to the CSS. That's typically a pretty good use case for SFTP because you don't have to download your database, your files. So you can just see, hey, that looks pretty good with the blue. You can just make little color changes there. But you can also do a whole lot more, which we'll get into. But all right, so we've got a few changes in our dev environment. One of the cool things, though, is that even though SFTP is sort of editing the files on the server, like maybe if you'd used a sort of an FTP or an older kind of server without version control you might be used to, where you just edit stuff and it changes. But one of the things that Pantheon really is great for is that it enforces this best practice of using version control, even if you're not super comfortable with Git. And the way it works is that as we sort of make changes to our site, it'll show up in the on-server dev with the different changes. And we have this option up here at the top to actually commit that to Git. So this is, if I go ahead and say, changing the button style to blue and commit, Pantheon will actually go out and it'll run those Git commands that I showed just a minute ago, but it'll do it sort of all automatically. So it'll go ahead and say, okay, let's go, take those changes. It knows that it's me, so it still attributes it to me, but it puts it into the commit log. For sort of the version control. So if I was to go back to Git mode, for example, and we can go maybe back to our file system, you can sort of see this is the Git checkout that we were working on. If I do a Git pull, it'll actually go out and download those file changes that we had made on the on-server dev, and it'll actually download it to my Git checkout. So this allows you to have a situation where you could have a sort of team environment where maybe, you know, someone was working on server and someone had a local checkout, and they can, you know, more or less coexist in terms of the development, which is really great. So you can use both, and at the end of the day, any change you make gets into Git, and that's really awesome. All right, so we've made a few changes to our dev site. We now have these blue buttons, which is pretty nice. But maybe we want to actually go ahead and push those changes live, or at least to test. So we can go into our test environment, and in the test tab, you'll see that we now have some information about the different changes that are ready to be pulled from the dev environment to the test environment. This is, you know, was our original test editing the hello.txt. It was changing the button style and then changing it again. And Pantheon makes it really easy to actually pull these changes because it, you know, calls out in a yellow box the stuff that has to be done. You can, you know, sort of check it up if you want to see specifically what the actual change is. So it'll go and do a quick diff, and you can see, oh, I added a little text to this file, and I changed the color here. And you can sort of preview it before it goes, which is nice just to look on the code level. But to actually see sort of what it would look like in you know, in production, Pantheon has a really cool feature, which is this button down here. It says pull content from live and code from development. So basically what this is doing is this is really letting you as developers take advantage of the test environment on your site. For folks who haven't used sort of test environments before, the basic idea is that you have your dev environment where you do most of your, you know, heavy lifting in terms of changing CSS, adding new modules, doing, you know, configuration that you export to code and stuff like that. And then you have your live environment where you're adding new content, new blog posts or forum posts, or adding users, or, you know, getting web form submissions, or whatever you're using with your site. And one of the things that sort of the test environment becomes really good for then is it gives you this option to take all of the development code you're doing and push that up to test so you can look at it. And it'll also go ahead and take all the files, database changes, and content from your live environment and pull it back. So as soon as I hit this button, which we can go ahead and do, it'll basically, you know, pull my content from live and my code from dev, and it'll give me a version of the test environment that would look exactly like what the site would look like if I pushed all that stuff live. And that becomes really good for folks doing QA, because if your dev environment, you know, maybe was a little out of date or whatever, you would sort of, you know, maybe not see kind of what exactly the effective stuff would be. But by having it, you know, sort of set up like that in test, you can sort of get this preview of what it would look like. And that becomes really awesome because, you know, then to actually go ahead and, you know, sort of do a QA process to sort of see if you want to push stuff live, you just sort of push stuff up to the test environment, you know, do some cache clearing, and you can sort of give it a look to, I can go ahead and do a quick look just to sort of see what it would look like. And then that's something that's a link that you can pass around to other people in your organization to sort of show off, or just sort of bookmark it yourself. So you can see, oh, well, these are blue buttons, looks pretty good. And then to actually go live, you sort of do the same operation, but on the live environment, you get this pull code from testing button. And that'll actually go take, you know, all that stuff that we just pulled to test and reviewed, and it'll go push it live. And then in our live environment, we'll now have all the latest code running, and that change will be pushed live. And, you know, this is the kind of stuff that sort of, you know, you can do if you're not using Pantheon by setting up some scripts and some, you know, the different environments yourself. But Pantheon makes it like dead simple to do this, and that every time you have a lot of reliability, because all you have to do to go live is, you know, push a button, and Pantheon takes care of the rest. And that's something that that's something that I think saves people a lot of time. It also prevents a lot of errors, you know, especially when you're updating code on your live environment. you definitely don't want to copy the wrong stuff or put it in the wrong place. And Pantheon sort of has your back and provides you those guardrails to make sure that the stuff you pushed is the stuff you like. So we're going to go ahead. So now the site's been pushed. We can go to live environment, and that's really great. So we've got we've got this change. So I'll go ahead and log into a live environment, and I can sort of show you around some stuff here. One of the things that obviously happens with folks who are using their websites is they're actually getting a lot of stuff that's changing on the website. So in this case, we have a lot of promotions at Pantheon where I tell people about stuff. One thing that we did recently was we updated our front page the other day to have a sort of new carousel at the front. So one of the things that you can do is we'll make a quick change just to our site. So I'll remove that instant performance banner, and I'll go ahead and add. We have a new promotion for one of our case studies. We'll add that, and we'll go ahead and add the TNR promotion. And now you'll see that our live site has this Enterprise Yes We Can New Republic sort of promotion, but our dev site, if we go back to dev, doesn't have that. And this is totally common because the live site obviously is going to have a bunch of changes. But one of the things as developers that can get a little tricky is that if your live site has too many changes, that it might be hard to actually do development. For example, if I want to see sort of how the buttons, want to change the button style again, seeing how it would look as a sort of smaller version or whatever, it could be really helpful. Or if I've added some blog posts that need custom styling, I want to make sure that I have those in my dev environment. And one of the tools that Pantheon allows you to do is something that you sort of called refreshing the dev database. So basically what we can do is, since we made a change in live that's not yet in dev, instead of having to go to the dev server and sort of replicate everything that we did in the live environment, copy blog posts over by hand or modify images, Pantheon allows us to have these complicated workflow tools that are on each of the environments. So I'm in my dev environment, I go into workflow, and you can see in workflow, I have a few different options of stuff I can do to sort of move stuff around in my environment. So, the clone operation is the most frequent. This is the one that we're probably going to use right now. What clone basically is going to do is it's going to sort of pull the database back from we're either testing or live, and push it into development. So in this case, we had updated the front page of our live site, and we want to see that on our dev site, so we can maybe make some additional CSS changes. We can select, to have both the database and the files moved back. That's typically a good best practice to keep your database and files together. And we have the option to run update.php. I'll talk about a little later. But in this case, we just want to pull this back, and what Pantheon will now do is it'll make a backup of the live database, and it'll make a backup of the live files, and it'll actually then copy them from the live environment and apply them to the dev environment. This will wipe out all the configuration and changes we might have made on dev, but it will make sure that we actually have a dev environment that now looks and feels as much like the live environment as possible. This is really helpful for development because you get the ability to easily sort of see the latest and greatest changes on live without having to go through a lot of complicated work to make sure that gets refreshed. So we sort of see under the dev environment, we can go ahead and let's see, and we can go sort of check out that front page after we clear the sort of varnish cache, and you can sort of see that that change that I had made in the live environment actually will get pushed back, and now we have this kind of thing in the dev environment, and we can sort of get up and running, and that's really useful. And so developing, you'll sort of do this a lot, right? You'll have your live environment getting new stuff, and then every once in a while you'll use the workflow tools to sort of pull back the database from live so that you can have the sort of freshest content to use for development, which is really great. So, also in the workflow tools, there's a few other things you can do. They're sort of less common operations, but you can import your database and files if you've got a sort of external version you want to pull in. You can export them out, and you can also wipe the dev environment completely, which will just remove the database and files. This is typically not advised because you'll lose all your stuff. But if you're doing development on an install profile, Drupal distribution, that's really important because then you can sort of test each time sort of what the installation process looks like. But clone is usually what you're going to use, and you just got to make sure that you've cloned from the environment you want to the environment you want, and that works for dev. That also works in the test environment or the live environment. You can sort of move the database around. Typically, it's not a great best practice to move your database from dev or test to live because that overwrites all the changes that you've made in live, and that obviously could be not great. But one technique that I've seen folks use is that they'll, in their live environment, they'll sort of take their live database and files from live, they'll push it to test, and then in their live environment, they'll add put it into sort of read-only mode. So this is like Drupal maintenance mode, but it requires this module, which will basically, instead of just saying, hey, your site's in maintenance mode, nothing can be seen, it'll show your actual site. It just won't let you use, add comments or new content. And that becomes really helpful if, say, you're making a bunch of content, you're staging a bunch of content. You can sort of pull your database from live to test. You can then make a bunch of changes in your test environment, and then you can actually push your database back up. And the read-only mode will make sure that you're not losing comments or stuff like that. That's a pattern I've seen. It's not particularly common, but some folks might find it really helpful. All right. So I've shown sort of how to move code from dev to test to live and move databases back and forth and along with the files and use FTP and Git. And that works really well for stuff like CSS changes, to change the style of the buttons, or to modify HTML or stuff like that. But one of the things that I think is definitely important in Drupal development land is you want to make sure that your actual configuration that you might do in development also gets pushed up. For example, when I'm doing work on my dev site, I'm doing a lot of things in the Drupal land that are definitely sort of like site building kinds of tasks that are helpful to have sort of done, and things like creating a content type or adding a view or modifying a panel page or turning on modules, even stuff like that. And one of I think the sort of challenges in the Drupal space is that the content types themselves or the views or the panels, these are things that live in the database. They're not things that sort of naturally live on the file system in a way that you can put them into version control or change them. And that makes it really tricky for a lot of developers because you're, sort of when you're adding new features or changing stuff on your site, if you add a content type to your dev environment, you end up having to re-click a bunch of times to move that to the dev environment or the test environment. And that can get definitely a little monotonous, and it can also be really tricky because there's a lot of room for error, and it becomes sort of hard. So the sort of best practice way that definitely we encourage at Pantheon, and I think in general is good for Drupal, is to, instead of just storing all of the configuration that you're making in the database and just having to sort of replicate it as part of a script when you go to test or live, instead recommend taking the configuration that Drupal you have in Drupal and exporting that out to code. So individual pieces of Drupal sort of work differently in this way. Like the views module has the ability to export, and you can add a special hook in views to do this. Content types have their own kind of structure. Panels have a slightly modified structure, and that each module sort of has its own exportables, it's called. But one sort of really great best practice that unifies them all together is a module called features, which hopefully you all know about, and if not, you should definitely know and love. Features has been around for a number of years. It's has several different versions, but the sort of core value of features is that it allows you to take configuration changes you might make in the UI, content types, panel pages, or other things, and it allows you to actually export those things to code in a way that you actually can sort of do version control around. So you'll see this is just sort of an example picture of the interface that of what it looks like. And so this is really helpful. And sort of I can run through for a quick example here. So this is the dev site. And one of the things that I probably would want to do in my dev site is maybe make a new landing page for something. And so I'll go ahead and quickly make a new landing page for my site. And we'll just, we'll call it promo. And we'll add it at promo. And we'll go ahead and create that landing page. This is going and actually creating a panels page on the back end. So sort of see, there's a new page. Can use my panels tools to go ahead and make some stuff. So we'll maybe go ahead and add maybe some information about our blog post to this promotional page, or maybe our Twitter posts, and go ahead and see that. That'll take a sec. So yeah, we'll add the latest from Twitter. That's sort of useful for promotions. Go ahead and save that. Maybe we'll make that into a sidebar. We'll change the layout of this page. Go ahead and save that. Customize it up. We'll go ahead and add. We've got an image in here. Yeah, I'll go ahead and a picture of beautiful San Francisco to the site. Let's see what else. Oops. Not wanted. And this is just the kind of stuff that maybe someone who's working as a sort of site admin on your site would do. Maybe not necessarily a developer, but it's stuff that nonetheless you'd want to have on your site. We can go ahead and say, make a latest blog post, let's say. So I'll make a quick page just to promote some stuff about Pantheon. Put the image up there, and you can sort of save. So we got it. Cool. So we got this picture of San Francisco, latest post, latest from Twitter. It's a pretty nice page, and on the dev site /promo, it's there. But if we went to the live site or even the test site, and we go to /promo, it is not there because we haven't actually edited it there. So one way to get it to the test site would be we could go re-click and do all the changes on the test site, but that can be a little bit tricky. So let's go ahead and use the power of features to actually go and put that thing where it needs to be. So features is a administrative module that has to be turned on and permissioned. We're using it on our Pantheon site, so it's already there. It's in /admin/structure/features. And if we go in, it'll actually boot up our features interface, and it'll load all the features that are on our site. So in Pantheon's case, we have a few features already that we've done. We've got some stuff for our blog and our user system, as well as a number of stuff from Panoply that we're also using. But to actually create a new feature, which we can do for this promo page, it's really straightforward. You just click New Feature, Create Feature up here. And it'll go out and it'll sort of give you a list of components that are called that are available to sort of use for your feature. So we can call this Get Pantheon Promo Feature. We'll edit it to have the correct name spacing. This is a feature to make a promotional page, and we'll add it to the group Get Pantheon where our other features are. And then what you do is sort of in this component section, this is where the real magic happens. What features allows you to do is any of the things that you see here, fields, menu items, permission sets, roles, formats, views, content types, these are all things that are actually able to be exported with features to code. So in this case, our promo page is part of Page Manager, and all you have to do is click sort of the button to say have promo be part of the feature, and then it'll detect automatically that you have to have as dependencies for that Chaos Tools and Page Manager. And then when you click, you sort of get all the stuff ready that you want on the right side as part of your feature, and click Download Feature, And your features module will actually go ahead and package up all of the different configurations that you need and actually give you a full module that will actually turn on and make you a promo page. So you can sort of see here under downloads, I've got this promo feature. And if I was to go ahead and open it up, you'll see it's an actual module here. I've got inside the module, it's really basic. So I can go ahead and show you what it sort of looks like. But you got under the module, you just say, hey, all I'm going to use is this features file. In features, you're saying I have the CTools plugin, and then the real sort of like soy meat of the thing is in hook default page manager pages. This actually is an export of that promo page that we have. It tells it what layout to use and what various paths and configurations and stuff. This is something that you can implement on your own as a developer without using features. This hook default page manager pages is something that if you have a page manager enabled, you can use. But features makes it really easy to sort of deal with that. So now that I have this module, I want to get the module on my Drupal site. And one great way to do that is I can either commit it to Git directly using the sort of technique before, or if I wanted to go into SFTP land, I can then, I think my connections should still be valid, and I can go up, so sites, all, modules, and actually move this feature up to my site. All I have to do is drag it over, and it'll upload my site. You can see here that we've got the feature module sort of ready to go. We can see here the various files, and then what we can do is not on live yet, so we can say hey, adding the get Pantheon promo feature, and we'll go ahead and commit. And what that's going to do is that's going to go ahead and commit our feature up to the version control repository. And this is really great because this is now something that it's in version control, so we can sort of see all the different pieces. It's something that if other folks are working with Git, or you're working with Git and you pull down, you'll have access to the code. And here's where it gets really awesome. So if I go to the test environment, and I'll say, let's go ahead and pull code from development, and I jump to the test environment, it'll actually move this module to the test environment. And if I'm to go, here's the test. If I'm going to go log into the test environment, I will have new code there. Now, promo doesn't work yet. You can see because the module itself has not been enabled. So if I go to admin and then into the modules or the features directory, you can actually see that you have this module sort of on the file system as something that you can play with. So let's see. This is the module filter module, by the way. It sort of makes the module page look a little better, which is a nice UI improvement for Drupal 7. So if I was as I said, I put the category as Get Pantheon, and you can see I now have Get Pantheon promo feature. And if I go ahead and actually enable that, what that's going to do is Drupal's going to say, okay, like turn on this module and check the hooks and realize that there's actually a page that's being defined by Page Manager now that has all the configuration that we specified, the images and the different other pieces. And it says, okay, I've gone ahead and saved our options. And then if we're going to go to our promo page, you can sort of see that now, wow, damn surprise, we have the same thing that was on test, just got put up to our on dev to our test instance. And now we actually have this promo module ready to go. And we've deployed this. And we didn't have to do any changes or anything else just to to get that working outside of turning on the module, which is really awesome. And we could obviously do the same thing to push to live. and if I pulled the code from testing to live and enabled the module live, we would now have this promo page. And that's really great because you can do this for a lot of different landing pages. You can do this for views, for content types, and for a lot of different configuration in Drupal. The other thing that Features is really good for, and this gets a little more complicated, but I think is really important, is that Features actually has really great Drush support. And Pantheon also has really great Drush support. So one thing, it's a little tricky to get set up, but one thing that Pantheon lets you do is it gives you this ability to download your Drush aliases, which is a little link on your site's page. And if I click that, you'll see it downloads a file called Pantheon aliases drushrc.php. And on the command line, if you're using Drush, what you want to do is wherever you've got Drush, I have it in developer/Drush. I think I have an old one here, but I basically copy over from my downloads the file into my Drush. I do drush cc drush to clear the Drush cache. And then if I'm going back to my directory and hit drush sa, you'll see I actually have a list of all the different aliases on my site. So we're using the workflow demo site. And if I try drush and then the alias, it'll actually go ahead and connect to the Pantheon server and give me the ability to run various drush commands. So I can just run a quick status just to show that that's possible. But you can sort of see here, it knows that it's on Pantheon and it knows what domain it is and stuff like that. And so something that could be really cool is I could go to the live environment and say I wanted to enable the module on the live Pantheon promo feature, I think that is it. And you can actually go ahead and do all the stuff that if you're using Drush as a developer on your local environment, you can actually go ahead and use those all on the live environment. So that'll actually go ahead and enable that feature on live just by using it by using Drush on the command line. And that's pretty cool. And it uses because I have my SSH key, it knows to authenticate me. And because I have that aliases file, it knows what's going on. But I said there was features integration, which is true. So one thing that we can do is to see for the commands for features. I just did a quick grep just to show all the features commands. You can see features has a bunch of different options for stuff that you might have. And you can do things like you can see all the components and you can add components like I was doing in that web UI before. But one really good best practice when using features is to sort of do features updates when stuff has changed. So for example, if we're going back to our dev site and say on that landing page, we liked we liked the way the promo page worked, but maybe we thought the Twitter was more interesting than the blog, and so we wanted to sort of move stuff around. So let's say we wanted to move the Twitter stuff here, and we wanted to move the latest post there. And so we've gone ahead and sort of done that. Well, one thing that features lets us do is we can use this option called features update, also shortened as FU, and we can go ahead and do a drush FU to that feature. That one has to be enabled on my production site. Let's see. And what FU will do is it'll actually do a quick rebuild of the feature, so that any changes that we had made will get thrown in. Go ahead and show you that. You can also do the same thing by going into the actual features interface, and you can do a quick, sort of a rebuild of your feature. And that will basically sort of show you sort of the changes that are made. So you see that we just moved this latest post over. That was sort of the change that was made. So you can go ahead and see under Get Pantheon promo feature, you'll see it's overridden. That's just indicating there was a change that was made from what was the default when it went into code. And you can see, oh, Page Manager got overridden. And you could do a quick review just to sort of see what the changes were. And you can see, oh, we made some changes to the sort of ordering of the stuff. New 2 became new 3, that kind of thing. But we could hit recreate, and that would actually do a sort of download of the feature again. And we could just push that up using the same method I just showed, or we can do the FU option, which will actually go ahead and it'll go ahead and sort of update. Because we're in SFTP mode on the dev site, it'll actually go export the new configuration changes to the feature. And this feature typically works really well for established sort of content types and stuff. It does have increasingly experimental support for things like media styles and file styles, and any contrib module can hook into the feature system. And it's gotten really good over the years. It's just rolled out with a new sort of interface several months ago that actually makes it a lot easier. But we can sort of see I did that Drush feature update, and then you can sort of see up here it knows that there's actually a change to the module, which was move Twitter and blog post positioning. And we can go ahead and commit that change in dev to code, so that it now knows that it goes from in a different order. And then if we go and sort of do that same process we did before in terms of moving test up, and we update that feature, assuming we haven't modified that feature otherwise, which is definitely a big if, but if it's sort of that promo page, we haven't touched it on test, we haven't edited it or anything, and we go ahead and do that, and then we go to our test site, we can actually easily sort of and go ahead and check out our promo section. Then we can sort of see how we now have the Twitter stuff at the bottom and the latest posts on the right. And that's a great way to sort of make changes to your Drupal site and in some of the content on your site without having to do a lot of clicking on the actual testing site to see what it would look like. Because maybe I want changes here. The image is a little close to the latest from Twitter items. Maybe I want to add some padding or something. And actually being able to see this and test this is really, really powerful. And we could also go ahead and then just deploy that to live. And that's a great way to sort of move features and code configuration. That was a panel, but you can do the same thing with views, same thing with content types, and stuff like that. This is how it works in Drupal 7. Drupal 8, for those who are interested, will be a lot better. There's a configuration management initiative that's done a lot of really great work in terms of making a lot of these kind of configuration things much more accessible to the file system, much more easily put in version control. And so that will be a huge level up in the Drupal space. Instead of having to use features did a lot of work to get this stuff to work more or less right, and Drupal 8 will make it a lot easier. So I'm really excited about where that's sort of running. The other thing, which maybe the last sort of super feature I wanted to point out is you had sort of seen that when I did go live with or push to test the feature, I actually had to do a module enable and click around even a little bit. That can be fine if it's just turning on a module or doing something small. But Drupal has this really awesome hook called hook update n. And this is something if you've installed a new module or a new version of Drupal and they tell you to run update.php, and it'll do some stuff like add a new field to a table, or it will change around some other data, or it'll update various pieces of information. What those modules in Drupal core are doing is actually using this hook to implement the various changes they want. So you can see a lot of times it's used to change fields or change user data. But one thing that you can do as a sort of developer is if you have a custom module that you've written and you actually want to have the ability to also take advantage of update.php, you can just implement this hook by yourself in your own module. So it's like module name, update, and then you have to use a sort of numbering convention that's sort of spelled out here. So get Pantheon custom module underscore update underscore 7000, and then you can actually run various Drupal commands like module enable that would actually turn on the module automatically. And one thing that Pantheon makes it really easy to do is if you have made a change, you were sort of seeing that it gives you the option to run update.php after a lot of different operations. And that's really helpful because you can actually go ahead and say, push my code from dev to test, run update.php, and then it will actually go ahead and if I had an update hook that did module enable, it'll turn that module on. And that's super pro because you can then like reliably test how all that kind of stuff is working. And you can make sure that when you push each time that it turns on correctly. And that's great. And it's definitely have to play around a little bit with it and look at how other modules are implementing it. But using hook update n is definitely a super best practice if you can do it. And that's a really great way to use a good feature of Drupal to do updates and then use the Pantheon system to run this automatically for you. The last bit before we just get into a little bit of Q&A is I just want to sort of show you through a couple of the other features that might be helpful in terms of workflow. So one thing that Pantheon also makes really easy is it gives you the ability to easily make backups of your site. You may have to switch back into Git mode to do the backups, but the way the backups work is that before to do a backup, it sort of might require a lot of sort of command line clicking or archiving. You'd have to take your files and archive them. You'd have to go figure out your MySQL credentials and dump the database. You'd have to go find the files directory. Pantheon makes this real easy for you. Instead of having to go through all that manually, you just hit create new backup, and Pantheon's sort of robots will go out and it'll say, okay, well, we know you want to back up your code, your database, and your files. And it'll actually go export each of the different pieces. And it'll take those things, it'll put them in archive format, and it'll push them up to Amazon's S3 service, which is coincidentally a different cloud than we're running our Pantheon infrastructure on. We run a rack space for most of our Pantheon servers. We offload the backups to S3, which is a good best practice also. And you can then see when you click on each of the links, it actually has our Amazon S3 link and then an authorization token so that they're secure. So you can either copy that link down if I want to get the database. I can go copy that link and it'll download directly, or I can just do a direct download and it'll actually go ahead and download my information. And that's really great if you need the backups for any other purposes, or if you maybe have made a bunch of changes, made a backup and then made a bunch of changes you don't like, we have this restore button. And that'll also sort of restore your dev environment or your test environment, your live environment to the latest version. And that can be a really great sort of easy way to sort of get back to where you were if you were doing some real experimental stuff. You could also download the files directly, and using the workflow tools, you could import it. So you could save a database, for example, make a bunch of changes, and then import it over the old one. And that's definitely a more sort of advanced option, but it's something that Pantheon makes really easy to do, and it helps you provide guardrails so that you don't like mistype something or sort of have to find the right passwords or whatever. You just can sort of easily back up and easily import, and that hopefully makes people better Drupal developers. That the stuff I showed with the dev, test, live, and features, and update n, and the workflow tools and stuff. I mean, these are things that maybe you wanted to do or even have done before or do regularly, but require a lot more clicking. Pantheon really tries to make it easy because, I said at the beginning, I mean, I really love Drupal, but Drupal can be really hard to use sometimes. And one of the sort of goals of Pantheon is to make Drupal easier for developers to use to have a really good time. And hopefully, for the webinar, you learn some stuff about our tools and how to use Drupal for dev, test, and live. But if folks have questions or other things, I mean, obviously, you just raise your hand in the GoToWebinar, and I'll try to address as many as we can in the 15 minutes that we have.
Great, thanks, Matt. The first question we have is from Chris Thompson. Will Drupal 8 support be immediately available when Drupal 8 ships?
So the question is, will Drupal 8 be available in Drupal On Pantheon and Drupal ships, yeah, Chris, absolutely. In fact, we're probably going to roll out Drupal 8 support well in advance of the actual ship date of Drupal 8. There's definitely a number of changes that have gone in to it that I think people want to play around with, and we'll definitely have that available in the coming months for people to try Drupal 8 if they want, or even to get into some development on sites.
Great. Diane wants to know, is there a bandwidth difference between dev and live? Sometimes her dev site seems to be running slow.
In terms of the bandwidth limit, Pantheon has for the sort of developer sort of tier, there isn't a bandwidth limit difference between dev, test, and live. There are some, sort of some basic resource limits, just because everyone on the server gets a sort of slice of it. So if you have a lot of users on the dev or the test site, it could run a little slow. But in general, we try to treat them the same. And hopefully that, if you have more than one person or something using it, you just have to, wait a hot second more.
Okay, so another question from Justin. Can you use Drush on the command line to clear individual caches?
Yeah, Justin, Drush will allow you to clear individual caches directly. The sort of clear caches button clears everything plus all the varnish or Redis. You could just clear, for example, the registry or the aggregated CSS and JavaScript. And that all the same clear caching functions available normally in Drush is available on Pantheon using the alias file.
If you use features, are you really coding in Drupal?
So the question is, if you use features, you're really coding in Drupal. Yeah, I think so. I mean, Drupal has always been a mix of some configuration and some code. It's not like a sort of framework where you only write code, that there's always been a mix in the Drupal space. What features really lets you do is take some of that sort of development work you're doing in terms of site building and put it all in version control to take advantages of that. It's not like writing a custom module or anything, but it is certainly, making sure you have the right code to run your site, and that's obviously the most important.
Great. I have another question. Is it possible to run from an alternate head branch if your current practices don't use the master branch?
Yeah, so the question is about version control on Pantheon, and the question is if you can run from an alternate head branch if your current practices don't use master. Right now in the Pantheon, master is the sort of master branch that we use to do deployments and to sort of work that way. I know people will work differently. Some people have a production branch or have different kinds of things. I would say that in the case of Pantheon, using the master branch will get you the best results, but if you have a sort of alternate workflow, it's pretty straightforward just to use the master branch as something that will be what you push to go to Pantheon, and you can use your own branching structure to do your development, but you do have to stick to the master one to make all of our sort of robotic magic work. So
if you have changes in dev that are not committed to live, then they will be lost when you clone from live?
Yeah, for that question, Ed, if you do clone the database from live back to dev, that any config changes or otherwise you've made on dev will be overwritten. And so that's why the features module becomes really helpful, because what you can do is make sure all of your changes you're doing in config are pushed to code, so when you pull the database over, you still have all those things. But definitely when you're overwriting databases, you do have to be pretty careful not to lose work. But hopefully with the features module, you can save it in version control, and then you'll always have a record of it.
Okay, I have a question from Kaliam. Features, he wants to know more about features best practices to prevent Pantheon 503 errors. I've used a ton of features for our site on Pantheon, but found out through your support team that it was my features that was making my site 503 error out. Is there a best practice, because we can't change our PHP?
Kaleem, that's definitely a much more advanced question, and will depend a lot on the kind of feature that you're making. One thing that I've definitely seen is that features does require a fair bit of memory to export. The newer version is a little more optimized, which can be helpful, and that if you do get errors on it, that's unfortunate. But it's definitely a power tool. I think the best practice with features that I found really helpful is to sort of try to do more of a additive model for a feature. So if you make a feature, say like the one we were making for our promotional feature, that the first step is just to make the feature and export it. And then what you can do is sort of incrementally use either the features UI, or in Drush you can do an FE operation, which will actually add new components to the feature. And one thing you can do if you're getting 503 errors is to sort of, or just it's just taking a long time, just add one thing at a time or a few things at a time, and that will obviously require a little less memory footprint and will be helpful. But if you are finding a problem with the platform, we have a pretty good support team. You can just file a support ticket, and you can work with them, sort of, maybe update your memory or get a better sort of situation. But a good best practice for features is to do it incrementally, just to avoid any sort of problems with the module or the platform.
So another feature question: when you turn that feature module off, does that page disappear?
Yeah, so with features, anything that's been exported to code that hasn't been overridden, when the module gets turned off, the feature gets turned off, it will turn off. And that's by design. That's actually pretty healthy too, because what you can do is then you can have a feature that maybe you get turned on for a little bit, like our promotional page, but if we turn off the promotional page, the page would go away. Typically you just have to sort of watch out for that, but it's, that's definitely by design, and it can be really helpful sometimes because you have a feature that does a bunch of stuff and you turn it off, it all goes away, and that can be exactly what you want.
Is there any way to get the database into version control, mostly just for backup purposes?
Yeah, Justin, for the database, I definitely don't recommend putting the database in version control. Version control it's much more helpful when you have actual individual files that you can sort of see the diffs on and do pushes with. The database itself you can't use the database off of the version control. I have seen some people do it in some cases, but definitely I would stick with just our standard backup technology to back up the databases when you need them, or export. They're under the workflow tools under export, you can actually export just the database if you don't want to do a full backup, and just sort of keep those in a directory of yourself and sort of use those there. Using it in version control can get a little slow because version control keeps a record of everything that you have, and if you start committing a lot of big databases or big files or things that are like more large in size than code, your version control starts to get slower and slower and bigger, and that can just be a little annoying.
What's the best practice to update existing modules using Git with local dev environment?
Oh, that's a great question, actually, Stefano. For updating existing modules, there's a lot of ways to do it. Drupal obviously comes with an update.php or update module that'll actually tell you the individual statuses for modules. So the most straightforward way is just in either your SFTP or your Git checkout. If you want to update the views module, you can download the views module Drupal.org, archive it, and push it up to your version control and commit it, new version of views. But because we have Drush support, there's an option in Drush that'll actually let you do actually update directly. You have to use SFTP, but there's I'm sort of showing it up now. You can sort of see there's the ability to update individual modules or to update all modules using PM update, and that'll actually update either Drupal contrib projects or themes, and you can sort of see a list of what versions they are and stuff like that. That's only for our modules or themes. If you want to update Drupal core, Pantheon actually makes that really easy. When a new version of Drupal core comes out, we'll actually commit those changes to our sort of drops repository, and then when you log in, sort of as soon as we sort of deploy out the update, you'll actually see in your dashboard the ability to update Drupal core, and you just click a button and we'll automatically update Drupal core for you, which is a really great feature.
When using SASS, would you recommend using Git or SFTP mode to upload CSS changes?
Yeah, so the question from Marty is around using SAS. In terms of using Git or SFTP, both of those are totally valid ways to work with Pantheon. I think it's really a sort of question of what kind of developer you are and sort of how many of those changes do you want to use. Typically, what I've seen is that folks who use Git will typically have a local environment on their computer, and they'll be very, they'll set up a database and a web server on their computer, and they'll use Git, and they would be good candidates to use Git with using SAS. But if you're using SFTP, you can also upload it there. I think it's really just a question of how do you want to have a full environment with Git you're using on your computer, or do you want to just use the Pantheon dev environment?
A question from Morgan. What's the latest status on providing multiple sandboxes beyond just dev and test within each site?
Yeah, so question from Morgan more generally in terms of Pantheon. So one of the things I showed was that there's a dev environment, which is just a single dev environment, dev dash. One of the features that we're working on that will be coming out in the coming months is the ability to actually have more than one dev environment. So there could be a Matt dev environment and an Ursula dev environment, or we could use Git to have different branches and have each branch have a dev environment. That's currently being worked on. We want to make sure we have a really clean interface for folks because having more of one dev environment could get a little confusing. But we're working on that now and it should be coming out in the next few months.
Question from Yuki on core module updates. How can I control when I want to update the core module and not automatically?
All right, Yuki. In terms of updating core, I definitely think it's a best practice to make sure you're always running the most up-to-date version of Drupal core, and that typically, especially now in the Drupal 7 lifecycle, the kinds of things that are coming out are more security or small bug fixes. They hopefully or probably won't be large changes that should have a ton of effect on your site. But every site is different, and so one of the things that we do on Pantheon to help you is that when you hit update core, it only does it in the dev environment first, so that you can check to make sure those changes are work in dev and then in test before pushing them live. So when you hit update core, it won't affect any of your production sites. You actually have to run it through the workflow process, same as everything else. And it's also something that's optional too. If for some reason you don't want to update Drupal, you don't click the button and you're fine.
A question from Michael. Clone locks the database, correct? If I have a huge site, I should avoid cloning from, say, live to dev during higher traffic times.
Yeah. So this is the question from Michael is if we have when we do the clone database, it will do some locking on the database to make sure that we have a great copy. But it shouldn't break your site or anything. If you've got a really big site, you might want to do some tests to do it off of the test database first, or to see how long it takes. But in general, we're definitely trying to support that operation, so you can pull stuff back from a large database. It just might take a while is sort of the trick, but it won't take your site down or anything. We're pretty smart about making sure that your production site will stay up and doing dev won't affect it.
Is root access allowed on Pantheon?
Yeah. So this Dan, this is a question we get a lot. Is root access allowed? There's sort of two answers to this. The first is that no, root access isn't allowed just because there isn't a single server that makes up Pantheon. Pantheon's made up of dozens of servers all across the cloud, and what you get when you spin up an individual site is sort of a slice of each of these things. You've got a little bit on the Solr server, a little bit on the database, a little bit on the app server, and if you have a big site, you have obviously quite a bit more. But we obviously wouldn't let you log in there. But second answer is you have all the power that you probably need to do Drupal development. You can access all the code. You can under this connection information, which I didn't show, you can sort of see under connection information, we give you access to the database and the files. So you can actually go in and you can see, well beyond just sort of the normal operations. I can go take the MySQL command line, I can drop into MySQL, and I actually have full access to all the tables and all the database stuff on the actual database that I'm running. You can see these are my tables. I also, on my file system, beyond code, I also have access to I can see my logs, I can see my files, I can see my configuration, stuff like that. It's definitely more advanced to use this kind of stuff, but it's available. Now, I know that's not a substitute for root access and that kind of control, but one of the things that we really try at Pantheon to do is provide those best practice guardrails so that you can have as much flexibility as you probably need, but without forcing people to be sysadmins. I know some people like to be sysadmins, and I do a lot of that stuff too. But it's Pantheon tries to make it easy, and so we try to restrict a little bit what you can do. But the advantage of that is that we give you all these extra power tools.
The next question is by Chris. In order to clear the APC cache through the Pantheon interface, do you have to have the module enabled?
So question APC is no, you don't. You don't have to have a specific module enabled in Drupal. We enable APC for all of our sites. APC is a super valuable opcode cache that makes Drupal much faster. If you want to clear the cache, you just hit the clear caches button on the dashboard, and that'll clear the APC cache along with all the others.
What's a recommended approach for hot fixes and branching in Git?
All right, so this, yeah, so questions around using Git and branching. So as you see here, the workflow we're using is really basic, dev, test, live. I didn't show branching or tagging or any of that kind of stuff. Git can do a lot more complex stuff. And I think in terms of best practices related to Git, usually one thing that, certainly what we do internally at Pantheon when we're using Git for our development is every feature, big feature that you want to do, you can sort of make as its own branch in Git. So if you're working on your website and say you're setting up a directory of of archived material videos or something, you could actually create a branch that's special in your repository just for that archive. And then you can sort of work on that kind of thing. And it's only when you're ready do you actually push it into master, which would then actually get it in a position to deploy. And then a good best practice is to use those branches to sort of work on the big features. In terms of the hot fixing, if you do have something that's super nice, you can actually do a straight hot fix and just push up that code directly and bypass some of the other stuff. And for those kinds of questions, we have this helpdesk.getpantheon.com where we try to sort of document some of the more code intensive and sort of specific kind of stuff here. So you can go ahead and look in our information, and that provides you some there's like some special tags you can use on the Git that will like make Pantheon do sort of pushes automatically. And if you have conflicts with some Git stuff, we have some information about that. But
so we're hitting 11:30, but Matt and I are going to continue with the Q&A because this session will be recorded. We probably have another 40 questions to go through, so we're going to do our best to go through these so they can stay recorded so you can view them afterwards. So another question we have is from Vivek. Can Drupal Commons or Commerce builds be installed on Pantheon?
Hey Vivek, great question. So right now it's no problem to run Drupal Commons or Commerce, and a lot of people are running those on the platform. That's the way you would do that is you sort of you set up a vanilla Drupal 7 site, then you import in the profiles directory the Drupal Commons or Drupal Commerce, and you would just sort of manage that like you'd manage any other module. One of the exciting things, though, is you saw at the beginning we had a bunch of distributions that we actually formally support, and that's something that when you install a distribution, if it's actually one of the listed ones on our platform, and you install it, you'll get that right out of the box without having to do anything. And as new updates come out, then you'll have the ability to you just hit update, and it'll update to the latest version of a Panoply or an open public or something like that. Drupal Commerce should be on the platform relatively shortly. We're sort of testing it out, and getting that sort of ready, so you'll have that as a one-click install. And we're hopefully doing a lot of really great stuff, adding a bunch more distributions for Drupal Con Portland. So look for that to break out big.
Chris would like to know, would it be possible to drush SQL sync from the dev site to a local copy of the site?
So good question, Chris. We actually, SQL sync is the one one drush command that we don't support on the platform. We had some of our engineers were looking at it's some questionable security considerations if we let people do that on the platform, and some performance issues on top of that. So that we do not support SQL sync on the platform, but you do have the ability to, as I said, connect with the MySQL stuff directly, so you can do some of the same operations, just not with drush. Sorry.
Alessandro has a question around multi-sites. Can I configure a multi-site project on Pantheon?
Yeah, so great question on multi-site. We get that a lot. In general, we don't support Drupal multi-site. That's something that there's a lot of reasons for that. Josh Koenig has a great blog post called Much Ado About Multi-Site on our blog that's worth checking out around that. In general, we recommend that people have a different site for each, for different sort of site instance for each sort of thing they want. If you have the need to have like tens or hundreds of sites, we actually have some special distribution tools so you can use a common upstream and do deployments. But we think it's really important and a really good best practice to make sure that every site has its own code base that's running that code. That's for formal multi-sites. We do have our support like domain access or something like that, which works similarly, although there's differences on the platform. And domain access, a lot of people are using that, and that's no problem.
John would like to know, instead of on-server development, is your staff still working on a VirtualBox OVF file to help set up a local dev environment optimized for Pantheon?
Yeah, great question, John. So To actually set up a local environment, obviously you've got to do a lot of, do some sysadmin on your own laptop to get that done. Things like MAMP or Megalodon will help a lot to get that set up. Pantheon isn't working on anything specific right now, although I would definitely recommend you check out a project called Calabox, which sort of does this kind of thing. Have a VM that integrates with Pantheon and has some great Drush integration. That's not done by Pantheon specifically, but it's done with a company, Calamuna. We work with works with Pantheon a lot, and they have something that might meet your needs. I'd check them out. They'll be at DrupalCon, and they have some blog posts on the Calabox.
Great. So a question by Albert. It's around updating modules best practice through the web interface using Drush or Git.
Albert, in terms of updating modules, really whatever you're most comfortable with. You can do it through web interface if you use SFTP mode. You can do it directly with Git if you sort of commit them. My favorite, and I think probably the best practice I'd recommend is using Drush to do update code. Either doing that on a local environment or doing that with our Drush aliases. Drush is super good about figuring out the latest version. It does a backup when it does stuff, and it is really smart about making sure everything gets updated as clean as possible.
Question by Matt. How do you handle database setting that should be different in different environments? So for example, I need to connect to a remote dev server in the Pantheon dev environment. When I move a database from production back to dev, how do I keep the development setting?
Great question. So one of the things that when you do an install, you'll notice is you don't put in the username or password for the database because we automatically put that in to your settings file. However, if you do commit something to the settings.php file on your checkout, we'll actually allow you to run extra code in settings.php. So you can do things like add information to connect to remote servers or other databases in there. If you want to sort of have code in settings.php that's conditional depending on what environment you're in, there's actually a variable called Pantheon_tier that is only available on Pantheon. And if you sort of do a variable get Pantheon_tier, it'll say dev tester live. And that's a good way if you're writing code normally that you can put a conditional thing on there, say if Pantheon tier exists at all, then you know you're on Pantheon, so maybe do something special. Or if Pantheon tier equal dev, then do something different for dev than for tester live. That's a little more advanced, but we definitely support that.
Question by Scott. When a Drupal core update is applied on Pantheon, will all the new core files come down locally on the next pull?
Yeah, Scott. When you do a Drupal core update on Pantheon and you do the update, it commits it to Git and is part of the version control history. And if you do a pull, you'll get all those new files and have the latest and greatest.
Another question by Blaine. Does Pantheon help automate the updates of Drupal core, or is it up to the site owner to update commands?
Nice. Yeah, Blaine. So Pantheon helps do Drupal core updates by having that one-click button, but you still have to click that button. The reason is we want to make sure that people, do some testing on the update to make sure that it doesn't break their live site. That's something people ask about. In the future, we might provide a sort of like, hey, I don't care, just update it anyway kind of operation. But right now, you have to do it manual. But it's just clicking the button to hit update and then doing 2 pushes and you're live.
Is Agar a way to use Pantheon, or is it a different system independent each from the other?
Yeah, so Agar and Pantheon are different, and Pantheon doesn't use Agar, but we do similar things. Agar's an open source project, which is really great, that lets you sort of deploy new sites and do it on a sort of local server. Very similar, but with Agar you have to sort of do all that setup and maintenance yourself. Pantheon sort of offloads that, but they're different systems, but they try to do some of the same things.
Is there a module that will enable the module generated by features, similar to writing a custom module for hook_update_n?
Yeah, Justin, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of Drupal modules. I don't know of one specifically. Usually, what I do to the enabling is write a hook update n and then have module enable with the name of it. But there may be a module that does that automatically for you. Drupal's magic that way.
Mm-hmm. John wants to know, are the sites stored in site/default or in site's domain name like Agar does?
John, the sites are all stored in site/default. That's where we put them.
Leslie, how do you make database structure changes in dev and test that with content from live?
So that's the question: is how do you make database structure changes in dev that will work content for live? Yeah, so usually with the database structure, database structures in Drupal are defined with a hook schema, and that'll say like what fields and what tables. And then if you're making changes, you can use the hook update end function to add or remove fields from those tables. And so typically, what a good best practice is to like write those update hooks in dev, pull your content from live, and then run them, and that'll affect the table structure, and in some cases change the data. And Pantheon makes that really easy because you can keep like updating the dev database and testing this to make sure you get it quite right. But that's usually the best practices: define a hook schema, the data structure, in hook update end, modify the fields, and then test them in the test environment, make sure it all works.
Craig has a question. Any of your clients using reverse proxies to send different subdirectories of the same domain to different sites on Pantheon?
Yeah, Craig. So every site on Pantheon uses Varnish as reverse proxy, and there are a lot of people are using the domain access module that will do some special magic depending on what kind of sites, what kind of domain you're coming in. I didn't show it in this demo, but each environment has a domain section that you can define multiple domains. So you could add 4 or 5 different domains to your site, and then use domain access to route it appropriately. It's more of a Drupal thing than a reverse proxy cache, but that's definitely a supported and used part of the system.
Vivek has another question. Are there any restrictions on modules that can be installed on a personal plan?
Yeah, Vivek. So with the personal plan, we don't specifically disallow certain modules, but the personal plan is definitely for personal sites. So modules like the services module, for example, that often are used for obviously much larger use cases than like my personal blog or whatever. Those could potentially be require too many resources. But we don't have any hard limits around which modules you can install. But definitely some modules are better for pro or business or enterprise plans just because of the nature of the module than something on a personal site.
So Yuki has another question. I hope you can pick my question. How to update core module 7.19 to 7.21?
That should just be the case of clicking the update button on the dev environment. And even if you're a few versions behind, it'll just do all the updates all at once and get you up to the latest.
In order to reduce feature conflicts, what is the best way to handle fields that are part of multiple content types?
Chris, so that's yeah. So the question is around having different fields for different content types and sort of how to reduce confusion. Depends a little bit on your development practice. One thing that I try to do is I try to not use the same field between different content types. So every content type has its own field. That's not always the best use case because you might have common theming or other development reasons to use them. But definitely if you can segment them out. I usually prefix all my fields with the content type name. So if I have a content type called blog, an image on the blog is blog underscore or field underscore blog underscore image. And that's definitely a good best practice for features because when you turn them on, you get all the fields, and turn them off, they go away, and you don't have to worry about conflicting them. If you do want to have them similarly, it's sometimes good best practice to have like a central sort of core feature that like has all the general fields you want, and then have other features sort of use that core thing. And you would put as a formal dependency in that module, that core module.
Okay, question around backups. Can we go back to not the last, but a prior backup?
Yeah, with the backups, it keeps a list of all the backups you have. We can make a new one, for example, and then you can go, we save backups for as much 1 month or 6 months. And if you have a business or an enterprise plan, you can keep backups for way longer. And you can have as many as you want in that case, and you can restore older ones too if you want.
Okay, question by Thomas Love. Can you export database using Drush from Pantheon dev to import to local dev environment?
Yeah, you can definitely export the database using either the backup tool or the export tool in the UI, or you can do it. You could do a MySQL dump from the database credentials, and I think Drush just uses MySQL dump, so that would export just fine. And any of those ways will get you the database, and you can put it on your local dev, no problem.
Do you recommend MEMP or a similar local development approach? Can you drop a few names I could refer to?
Yeah. So the setting up a local development is going to depend on Windows, Linux, or Windows for environments. I personally use a set of scripts called Megalodon that work for Mac OS. It's on GitHub. It basically will set up it'll set up a bunch of the similar kind of setup to Pantheon. But I check out Megalodon. It's not the fish. It's the Drupal installer. Then I'd also check out Calabox. That is a sort of more VM approach. Megalodon basically just sets up scripts on your Mac to get all the stuff ready. Calabox will actually take a VM that you run separately, and that will do your dev environment. Both of those are really good to check out. But MAMP is really good, and for that kind of stuff, just whatever you're familiar with is nice.
Andres has a question. I'm not a developer, but the manager of an agency that employs freelance developers. We're trying out Pantheon, and developers tell us that they can only push all of tests to live, not push just selected completed tasks. Is this true?
With respect to the pushing code, anything that's committed to master when you push to test it'll all come. So and that's sort of part of a good best practice philosophy. Only anything that you only commit to master for stuff you actually want to sort of push through the pipeline. However, using Git, you can have separate branches where you try out more experimental stuff and then only merge the stuff into master you actually want to push forward. But anything that's pushed to master, that goes through the pipeline, but you can use Git to do branches to keep stuff that you don't want to go in that direction.
Jake has a question. Can we run Node.js or Ruby on the server?
Jake, right now our platform doesn't support Node.js or Ruby on the platform. We are Drupal only because Drupal is best.
Vivek has another question. Are dev and test sites secured at the web server level to prevent unauthorized users from seeing non-production features content?
So the question around securing the sites. So under security for each of the environments, there's a lock option there, and it's secured on a per environment level, and you just set the password there and go, and you're good to go.
Michael has, does clear caches in the dashboard include the views cache?
Oh. Doesn't it? I don't think that. So the clear caches button on the dashboard, it clears varnish cache, APC cache, res cache, and it runs a drush CC all. I'm not sure if the latest version of views cache does hook into that drush CC all functionality, but if drush CC all does it, the dashboard will do it. Views may be a separate case, as well as some other modules that have their own sort of caching functions. Although most of them should tie into the normal Drupal cache, which will get cleared with the clear caches button.
Scott's question is, are remote drush commands supported through aliases?
Yeah, correct. I know that just for a hot minute earlier. On your dashboard for the, you have a download all drush aliases, and that'll actually download the information for all your sites on your dashboard to put into drush, to do drush SA and C. If you add new sites, though, to your dashboard or get shared to new sites, you need to re-download that drush aliases file, so you always have the latest. But once you have the drush aliases file, you can type drush SA, and you can see all your aliases.
Great. Does Pantheon offer Git flow integration?
Pantheon does not offer Git flow integration specifically, no.
Can you roll the code back to a prior commit in SFTP mode in the web UI, or does it require Git?
So great question. Around SFTP mode, you can definitely do changes in SFTP mode, and if you don't like them, you can sort of like toggle to Git, and it'll remove all, and then toggle back, and it will just like get rid of all your changes. It'll give you a warning saying you're getting rid of them. So you could just, in SFTP, for something you haven't committed yet, you could get rid of those. But once it's committed to the version control log, you have to use Git to do reverting. But that is that's definitely supported by version control, and definitely a pretty clean practice.
Does Pantheon support subdomains?
Yeah, Justin, Pantheon supports subdomains. You can use domain access module to do some routing, or you can set up your own domains. That's through the domain interface. And then we have on the help desk page, we have a lot more information about how you deal with the domain names and deal with the DNS and stuff like that.
Brian has a question around file sizes. How big can file directories get? Like 1+ gigabyte before Pantheon isn't the best solution?
So with files, I think from the web UI to do an import, we have a 500 megabyte limit, but you can definitely do a lot more using your SFTP. You can see there's a files directory, and you can sort of SFTP stuff over. Typically, if you have like a lot of files and you're running a sort of big kind of enterprise site, that's the kind of thing you probably should contact us about. If you're running a lot of files, and we have a support team that can help you make sure to have those files. But we have sites with tons and tons of files on them. It's just if you have a lot, you should talk to us because we can help you specifically get all that working.
All right, he has one final question. What's the best mode_rewrite replacement you'd normally do in .htaccess?
So the question here is around rewriting domain names. Usually what there's on the help desk page, we actually have a bunch of example codes for things that you might want to, like real common stuff like force SSL or force a www subdomain. And the best practice there is actually to put it in the settings.php file. The HTAC, we use Nginx instead of Apache, so some of the patterns, as your question suggests, are not necessarily all the same. But the best practice is to do it in settings.php, and our help desk page has some information around all of that.
Do we support Civic CRM?
Yeah, so Sonia, we do support Civic CRM. Hopefully, by DrupalCon, we'll have the Civic CRM distribution of the platform, so you can one-click to install it, and you sort of can get it up and running. They're working on a starter install for Civic CRM, but you can install it normally on Pantheon. It's definitely not like straight down the middle in terms of what we support, but plenty of folks who do Civic CRM, and it's fine.
Is there a Pantheon best practice to automate offsite backups for a compliance requirement, or would backup and migrate be the best bet?
So Pantheon already does offsite backups using our tool, and one of the things I didn't show is you can actually, for like if you have I think you have to have like a paid plan, but you can do you can schedule backups, so you can have a backup happen every month or every day or twice a day or whatever you want, and those backups are all stored offsite on Amazon S3. If you have a need to have the backup somewhere special, not S3 in the cloud, you could use Backup and Migrate, or you could use other services. That's no problem.
So we have two more questions. Any way to display file upload progress when users are uploading large files or images to file field?
Yeah, I think we have the Peckle extension installed to do update progress on the system, and that should work pretty well with the file field module, the image field module. I haven't done a lot of that myself, but that's definitely the way Drupal does it, and I'm pretty sure we have that set up to do it right.
Great. And our final question, Matt, does Pantheon support using submodules with Get?
Yeah, Pantheon supports sort of the full Git options. You can use submodules. Submodules have a lot of benefits and a lot of they're a complex thing to do, but we definitely support them, and you can use them, and sometimes they're really, really, really good. I would check out on groups.drupal.org. There's a project called Dog that Sam Boyer is working on for a while that has a lot of that kind of like advanced Git information, and that's worth checking out as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt, so much for the presentation and for the 2-hour training. The next steps here are we'll download the recording and we'll share it with you in the next couple of days. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to hosting another training.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for watching, and we'll definitely see you around the Drupal space and on Pantheon.